David Liddle may be known for his contributions to many major names in Silicon Valley and innovations. You think of Xerox PARC in the 70s and 80s, you have to think of his name. A Metaphor Computer, he founded that. Interval research with the late Paul Allen. The list goes on and on and on. To sum it up, he and his teams really moved the computer industry forward with innovations in networking, such as the invention of Ethernet, the commercialization of things like graphical user interface, and I would say containerization of software, those concepts. And he made, the kind of these development of tools that made it easy for the Kens and the Janes of the world to access computing. And that's really amazing stuff. And about a week ago, we had a chance to hear him and his colleagues talk about the start of Ethernet and the huge contributions that has had. But what's very interesting is he threw out a little gem that a college project, a college job that he had became very influential in the early days of Ethernet. And so I'm going to talk to him about that today. And David, why don't you tell us about how your work in MATV, Master Antenna Television Systems in schools, led to the topology that became the first Ethernet systems.
In my last year of undergraduate school in electrical engineering at Michigan, I had a summer job and then a part-time year-round job working on a project by which microwave towers were being put on some of the high schools in the city of Detroit. And this was used for educational television broadcasts or locally within a school. There would be a microwave tower with a dish that looks very much like a DirecTV dish because it was operating at 2.5 gigahertz. And so my job was to ride in it with a guy in a truck where we cranked up a little tower with a dish and aimed it around until we found ourselves pointing at the local broadcast site, then recording that height and that direction. I came back to the office and made a drawing for a tower to be put up, and I did the stress analysis and all that, and then got it checked by a mechanical engineer to make sure that it was sound. And then I laid out a cable in a bus structure, go through the school and pass over the classrooms which were to have the television in them. Now, the effect that you're talking about on the invention of Ethernet was that I had laid out this big fat RG11 cable through these schools, made the drawing for that. And the way that we connected the TV sets was using a device from Gerald, a tap, onto that big coaxial bus. It was a beautiful piece of work that Gerald had done. It was a nice tool. You could core it into the coax, snap on the connector, and attach whatever it was you were putting in there, a TV or other attachment. And so years later, I'm at Xerox PARC, and Bob Metcalf has been inspired by the Aloha network to think of having a broadcast type radio network to interconnect all of our computers in Xerox PARC. But there were concerns about this, that we'd have interference from broadcasting in the building, and there'd be licensing issues and all kinds of stuff. Mm-hmm. So it was proposed that instead of broadcast, we broadcasted into a coax, which would act as the luminiferous ether, as Butler put it. And of course, that's where it got the name Ethernet, because there was already an ARPANET and Aloha net and so on. So we started calling this idea Ethernet. But Metcalf had written a memo saying, in search of a passive branch, and he was drawing diagrams of a completely passive but branch table system. This just didn't seem acceptable to me because obviously every time you create a branch, you reduce the impedance again, and so more and more power is required as the thing grows larger. And I said, no. You want a bus structure, and rather than a brancher, you want a very high impedance match tap. And they said, well, how would you make something like that? Said one of the other people. And I said, no, it already exists. It's a Gerald cable TV tap. So this was a long stride forward only in the sense that it saved us a lot of messing around. And right off the bat, when we were just beginning, we had a good way to tap the ether cable.
What's fascinating to me is that you were actually in charge of PARC. Is that correct?
Well, this is a little complicated.
Okay.
Xerox PARC. PARC stands for Palo Alto Research Center. Was a research lab, like Bell Labs, okay? And I was a member of the research staff in PARC, as was Bob Metcalf and Dave Boggs and the other people that worked on this project at that time. Now, in early 1975, I was asked to go off and start a new department and eventually division called SDD, the System Development Division, okay?
Okay.
And it was there in Palo Alto, but it was not part of the research center. It was there to commercialize stuff from the research center.
Okay.
The graphic user interface, the Ethernet, laser printing, client server architecture, and so on. So I was running that operation, okay, the commercialization thing, which of course eventually became a reasonably big division.
You know, I talked just a little bit about the kind of management you had then, the fact that you could bubble things up quickly and make decisions and maybe look at things in a different way. How did all that work?
Xerox at that time was the darling of Wall Street. It was just growing like a weed, very profitable. The stock price was way, way, way up. But the chairman of Xerox, a really, really smart, insightful man named Peter McColough, also realized that A, we wouldn't be able to cut down trees to make copies forever, and B, that the patent cliff was there. That is, Xerox had an extremely strong patent position, which was why it had almost no competition, but we were right at the moment where the principal patents were going to run out. And so Peter McColough said, I want Xerox to become the architects of information. This was a very useful statement because it allowed you to do quite a few different possible things within that range. In other words, it wasn't terribly restrictive. And a very good team had been collected in the research lab that had a lot of good, fresh ideas. So senior management was supportive of this because Xerox was a company that had been founded on research and on a very strong patent portfolio.
And it was a very young team. I mean, you guys were all pretty young at that time, right?
Well, that's true. And it's because at that time, computer science as a college major, so to speak, was quite new. It was almost always just a subset of electrical engineering. In fact, at that time, there were only 3 places in the country that had separate computer science departments. MIT and Stanford and Carnegie Mellon were the 3 that had grown large enough in that area to build separate departments. But it was all the rage everywhere, you know, and people were understanding computing as something more than just sort of classical enterprise data processing.
It sounds like kind of the crypto world of today, where no one really has been educated in it, right? It's new to everyone.
That's right. So the reason why there were so many young, quote, young people was there were no old, bold computer scientists.
Yeah. The thing that you brought, though, it sounds like, is this unique background of a college job, just, building something that was different from a computer.
Right. Well, almost all of us somehow or other were involved with ARPA in those days. That is, maybe in graduate school or something. Okay. And so many of us had worked at places that were on the ARPANET.
Okay.
So we got the idea of networking, but the difference, of course, of the ARPANET was still a terminals and hosts kind of thing. It's just you sat at your terminal connected to your local host, and your local host reached out on the ARPANET to a remote host. So now you were sitting in California, but using a computer at MIT. Okay. So the idea of a very high quality email and file sharing and swapping and all that stuff was familiar to most all of us, but not, as Bob Metcalf sometimes says, not packets to the desktop, but packets to the local host and then RS-232 or something to the terminals. And that was what we changed at Xerox PARC.
That idea of connecting peripherals and really kind of distributing things, I suppose, is that what you're?
That's exactly right. Yep.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so, that it sounds like, now, was that your first job out of college, your first, kind of full-time job, or?
No, it was my first job after finishing my Ph.D.
Okay.
Then I came out to California in '72 to Xerox PARC. But I had done the other job that we were talking about with the Detroit Public Schools Electrical Engineering Department. That was in 66 and 67.
And then did you stay, you did that in 66, 67, then went back to school full time, or?
Well, I worked on an ARPA project and went to school at night. Actually, the University of Toledo, God bless it, is one of the places in the world you can get a PhD by going to school at night. And during the day, I worked on several ARPA projects, particularly ones involving the plasma panel that had been invented at the University of Illinois. But this was in the Vietnam era, and so I worked on a number of other projects that are probably still classified.
So plasma panel isn't a plasma screen type of thing?
That's right, yeah.
Interesting. So that probably informed you of some of the things moving forward when you're at Xerox and GUI interfaces and things like that, I assume.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I became a graphics person because of that, at that time. And those early plasma panel days were very exciting and very interesting. What happened, though, was that when we started working on the plasma panel and building a bunch of them and deployed them and so on, but when we started on that, memory cost a penny a bit. By the time we had finished really commercializing and making high quality terminals with these plasma panels in them, memory prices had fallen to 1/10 of a cent a bit. So it was kind of hard to charge $2,500 for a 512 by 512 panel when you could get the same amount of memory for $250 and connect it to a CRT.
I see. So it was just not quite ready from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, it had many other advantages. It was really good resolution and very durable, and it had many good things about it, but economics changed dramatically in a short period of time.
But I assume that all those things you kind of, and I guess that's like with any career, the things that you do become kind of like this gumbo soup or something, and it just informs you of different things later.
Exactly right. You retain the little techniques that you used in one context, which inspire you to use them in a different one. And that's exactly what happened.
So from a, I guess, an advice standpoint going forward, what would your advice be to, college students today looking at that summer job or trying to figure out a path to move forward?
The most important thing, in my opinion, about a college education in engineering, especially a subtle field like electrical engineering or computer science, is it's important to get a feel for what it's going to be like when you're out there doing it. And there was a long period of time where education in those areas didn't really prepare you for what it would feel like. In other words, it all kind of became applied math, and and you're much less likely to do something, calculating electromagnetic fields than you are to do something, designing a little bit of logic or, that kind of stuff. And visual thinking becomes very important. And I used to have to make drawings with lead pencils on a drawing board. And of course, now it's effortless for me to just sit down on my computer and make a drawing. Not that my drawings are very good, but the computer helps me a lot. And I always feel badly that there are still some students who finish a very distinguished undergraduate career, but they don't have at least clue what it's going to feel like, and they take a job and they're very disappointed by it, or they're not well prepared for it. So this rambling discourse here is to say that my advice is better to take a low-paying or inconvenient job that's close to what you are studying and think you're going to do than to just get the best possible financial job for a summer or part-time that doesn't do anything to help you with that. It's a funny thing that if you just graduate with a Bachelor of Science in engineering, you're marginally able to function right away. If you get a master's degree in engineering, guaranteed you can perform your job right away. And there's sort of an illusion that people with brand new MBAs can be businessmen right away. That's far from true. Brand new graduate engineers are much more prepared to fit into the economy, either in a small brand new company or an established one or what have you. I'll give one more small piece of advice as long as I'm on my soapbox here. If you think you know a lot about exactly what you want to do and you have sort of a clear picture of it, it's kind of good to join a big company, because in that environment, you can practice your art and there will be other people doing it and you can get really good at it and concentrate on it. If you're not sure exactly what you want to do with your new education, much better to join a small company, even a startup, because you're kind of a utility infielder. You're going to do a whole bunch of different things anyway.
Right.
You're going to learn a lot about yourself and about what you do like and don't like. So those are two sort of different tacks, but one size does not fit all in terms of what's the right thing to do when you're going out into the big world of employment for the first time.
Well, and with Xerox, with PARC, it was an SSD even, it was probably more of a startup feel for you than it was going to, within Xerox, right?
No, that's exactly right. It was just like...
Because you were still a pretty young guy, right, during those days? I mean...
I was 30 when I was asked to go and start SDD with Harold Hall. That was all right because this was a brand new deal inside Xerox. There were no hard and fast rules about how you did it. Xerox had been in the computer business, having bought scientific data systems. But that hadn't worked out super well, and they had just sold it sold it to Honeywell. And so there were still some very good computer engineers to be had in Xerox, some in Los Angeles and other places, which gave us a running start to get going. But by combining that with some people at PARC who were interested in leaving research and commercializing some of what they'd been working on. But it was very much like a startup. And of course, after that, I did do a startup at Metaphor. And later on, acquired by IBM, and I spent some time in IBM after that, briefly. And then went on to do interval research. But my point being that if you're inside a company that's doing well, but knows that it needs to try to reinvent itself, that's exactly like a startup, no matter billions of revenue in their traditional business they have. And that was exactly the case at Xerox. And Xerox Corporation really funded research well, and they trusted us to try things, develop new products, and so on. And it was a great environment in which to do that.
It's hard to remember this, or hard to believe what a monopoly, not a monopoly. Well, I guess the government thought it was a monopoly, right? I mean, it was Xerox kind of had its hands tied as far as competition and the government's perception of competition, right? I mean,
yeah, they were subject to a consent decree and so on. But this suddenly, as I said earlier, the patent cliff showed up. And who should show up but IBM and Kodak, two of the biggest, scariest companies in the world. And they both decided they were coming into the copier business. And Xerox absolutely fought them to a standstill and blew them both out of the business. The much more serious company came from Japanese companies, which started small. That is, they started on the desktop, of low end copiers. Much like what happened in the auto industry or the mini computer industry or other areas, where instead of challenging the big dominant player at the profitable high end, they found how to run a lean shop and start at the low end. And it was very difficult for a company like Xerox to match the cost structure of these new companies.
Yeah, but it sure had foresight to invest in what you were doing at PARC. And well, David, I really appreciate your time and this insight. Thank you very much. And
oh, it's been my pleasure, Ken. Thank you.